Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Ryan Gottfredson. He is a best-selling author, leadership professor. He shares with us how shifting from performance to mindset can unlock real lasting transformation. We learn from him the hidden drivers of success, the power of vertical development, and how to elevate your life by elevating your being. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm across the world from where you're at, so I appreciate being able to connect with you.
Same here. Welcome to the show, Ryan. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll learn from you about how one can transform their life and learn about leading and how to live perfectly. So in this backdrop, we'll have our conversation. But before that, Ryan, let's understand a bit about your journey, your background, so that people know who they are listening to.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Gottfredson. I appreciate the introduction, and I am coming at you from Southern California. I'm about 30 minutes away from where Disneyland is. So I'm in Orange County, California. I'm a professor at California State University-Fullerton. If you haven't heard of Cal State Fullerton, that's not a surprise, but we actually have the second largest business school in the United States. So we have a big operation, and I get to specialize in what I love learning about and talking about, and that's leadership and personal transformation. So I do research and I teach at the university, and then I also have my own consulting practice where I work with organizations all over the world to help them develop their leaders. And if you can see behind me, I've written a couple of books, Success Mindsets and the Elevated Leader. And I have a new book coming out here in June called Becoming Better, the Groundbreaking Science of Personal Transformation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Brian. And we'll talk about your book for certainly, especially Becoming Better. But before that, let's understand, you talk about that doing more isn't enough, isn't working anymore. And that is where, you talk about the case for being better. So what do you exactly mean? Earlier on, are these words your understanding, or the world is changing very fast? Earlier they used to talk about, that we should produce very, very strongly together, like China is doing. Nobody tells them you become better, rather than they produce so much that the world is buying for them. Now they are trying to untangle, but on an individual level, for a leadership level, I don't know, people want more from you. I don't know whether they want better from you or not. So that's in that so many different things. Just help us understand, what do you mean by doing more working isn't working, and about the case for being better.
Yeah, so let me set up a framework, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Okay, so here's one of the things that I've learned is we actually have two different sides of ourselves. So one side of ourselves, if we think about an x-axis, one side of ourselves is what I call the doing side. This is our talent, our knowledge, our skills, and our abilities. When we improve along our doing side, we improve our ability to do more. And that's not bad, but we just need to recognize there's another side of ourselves. The other side of ourselves is what I call our being side. Now, our being side is, we could talk about it as being our character, the quality of our mindsets, our psyche, our level of consciousness, our ability to emotionally regulate ourselves. And ultimately, our being side is the quality of our internal operating system. And so as I just present this to you, let me ask you a couple of questions. Out of these two sides, which side does most development efforts focus on? The doing side or the being side?
Well, both sides need continuous refinement. But yes, sometimes you can do good because of your skill sets, but being side, especially in today's time, you need to constantly evaluate yourself and make sure that fragments from outside world are not impacting the being that you are, whatever person you are. So yes, that needs continuous evaluation. The working side also needs continuous evaluation, especially looking at things, how they are developing. You need to be competitive in today's world. But yes, both the things, I guess, depending on individuals, they have to look at both sides in their way. Which one needs more effort? Sometimes, being does need a lot of effort, especially, if there is some wrong people in your life.
Yeah. So you think about it this way. When you think about our education systems, our athletic programs, and most of our organizational development efforts, they all focus primarily on our doing side. For example, why do I take an accounting class? It's for me to gain accounting knowledge and skills to be able to do accounting things. But you mentioned earlier, our world is growing increasingly complex. Does knowing how to do accounting improve my ability to handle stress, complexity, uncertainty, and pressure? No. And so if I want to be able to do that, I can't focus on the doing side, right? I've got to focus on something else, and I've got to focus on the being side. And here's what I've learned. I've learned a couple of things. One is if we have two different people that are the same on their doing side, but they differ in their being side altitude, the person who's higher in their being side altitude is going to get more out of their doing side. The other thing that I've learned is that if we improve along our doing side, that can be helpful, but only transformationally so. But if we can elevate along our being side, that is transformationally helpful. That's really the only way that we could transform ourselves. Think about, I'm going to give you some characteristics, right? When you think about the best leaders and the best people, these are people who are generous, they're empathetic, they're resilient, they're wise, they have the ability to, they have empathy, emotional intelligence, they're willing to be vulnerable, right? When you think about these types of characteristics, these aren't doing side characteristics. These are being side characteristics. But here's the thing. Most people have never really given much attention to improving along their being side because we're trained so heavily, again, across our education systems, our athletic programs, and our organizational development efforts to primarily focus on developing knowledge and skills. And so if we can connect with our being side, we could transformationally elevate our life.
Absolutely. But tell me one thing, Ryan, is the doing side and the being side for everyone? Isn't it that some people will be most happy or are best suited for the doing side, and being side is only suited for some of the people, or maybe at different stage in life for people who are focused on the doing side? Help us understand then, who is this whole transformative talk for? Is it only for a particular set of people, or can everyone look at being on the being side, especially at when they are also good at the doing side at the same time?
Yeah, great question. So here's one of the things that's going to be helpful for us to understand is there's really only one field of study that is primarily focused on the being side. This field of study is what we call developmental psychology. And developmental psychologists have learned that as we as children go from infants to adults, they go through a number of different stages. They go through about 5 childhood development stages, and they do so rather automatically. So we know a lot about childhood development, but what we've also started to piece together is that there's also adult development stages. In fact, what these researchers have found is that there are 3 adult development stages, and we can all improve along these adult development stages. We can all improve along our being side. But here's the kicker. What they found is that while everybody can improve, development as an adult is not a function of age. It really is a function of effort. And so, one of the reasons why we know this is because what we've learned is that while all adults can develop, most adults don't. So what we find is if we look at these 3 adult development stages, 64% of adults generally only stay at the base level of adult development. 35% get to the second level, and only 1% gets to that top level. So it's rare. It's relatively rare for people to develop along their being side, but it can be done if we could better understand what our being side is and better connect with it.
Absolutely. Let's look at it from a soldier's point of view. A soldier who is in a battlefield, at that point in time, they have to look at the doing side, not and the being side. So is it that both these sides have to be looked at different stages in life? Or is it that only some people have to look at it from both sides? For a leader, they have to be also on the doing side as well as the being side, because you are leading others at that point in time. The unfortunate thing is leaders are not neither good on the doing side, neither good on the being side, leading to the great resignation, the quiet quitting, and now the revenge quitting also going on. So I want to understand these things. It can confuse some people if they do not understand what exactly is there. As we say in India, your karma, your exactly your motto, exactly what you are supposed to do at that point in time, because life sometimes can be a battlefield. Help us understand among for the common person about these dilemmas of life, Ryan.
Well, here's what I know, right? So we want to be high on our doing side and we want to be high along our being side. That's the best. We want to be in this high quadrant. But what I've learned is that in order for us to successfully and effectively navigate the pressures and demands of our world, is that the side that is most important for us is our being side. The people who are higher on their being side are more emotionally regulated. Here's one of the big differences. People who are lower on their being side are more reactive. People that are higher on their being side are more intentionally responsive. And so what we know is that people who are more reactive, they tend to not handle pressure or stress or the demands of their life very well. But if we can elevate along our being side, if we can move from this state of reactivity to being more intentional and proactive, then that will allow us to be able to navigate our lives in a more effective level. I mean, the reality is if we're living life, let's just say if I'm thinking about grades in school, we've got A's at the top, B's, C's, D's, and F's, right? If we're living life average, let's just say at a C level, the only way that we can get to a B level or an A level really is if we elevate our being, not just improve our doings. Now, ideally, at the end of the day, we probably need both. But again, what I've tried to articulate is that most people only focus on the doing side and they neglect that being side. And when we can elevate our being, who we are, then everything else follows.
Absolutely. So, Ryan, do you mean that now that we need to change the whole definition when someone says that you need to grow, that they have to specify grow where, either vertically, horizontally, or in terms of doing side or in terms of the being side? Do you think it's time for organizations to start making that difference? Different way of understanding things within organizations, also in the outside world, especially in this age when it can be very difficult for messages to get lost in translation.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to have to be an absolute imperative for organizations. And here's why. So while I told you, if we got these three levels along our being side, I told you 64% of all adults operate at the base level, 35% at the second level, and only 1% at the top level. But if we look at leaders in organizations, leaders, what we find is 7% operate at the base level, 85% operate at the second level, and only 8% operate at the highest level of that being. So what that says to us is most leaders, when we think about the doing side and being side, most leaders operate from a high doing side, low being side. And one of the reasons why we know this is, how does most people get promoted into leadership roles? It's because they could do certain things well. They're really high on their doing side. But again, that doesn't mean that they're high on their being side. And so what we find in organizations who promote these high doing, low being leaders, they end up not being very successful. But the organizations that can get high doing and high being leaders, those are the organizations that are successful. So let me give you an example of this. So I think one of the best examples to look at is Microsoft. So Microsoft from 2000 to 2014 was run by Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer is one of these high doing, low being leaders. We know this because he was primarily focused on short-term wins and gains. He's really focused on outcomes. Well, who comes in and during Steve Ballmer's tenure, Microsoft's stock price stayed the same during those 14 years. Well, who comes in after Steve Ballmer? Well, it's Satya Nadella. Satya Nadella comes in as CEO in 2014, and he steps in and he says, look, we've got to change the culture at Microsoft. The C in CEO stands for curator of culture. So he invests deeply in coming up with a new mission statement, invest deeply in developing more of a growth-minded culture. And he starts to invest, as he invests in this culture, then innovation and creativity take off. And what's been the effect? Well, over the last, what are we now? Since he took over in 2014. So we're now 11 years into his tenure, and Microsoft's stock price is up about 8 times since when he took over. And that's the effect of these high doing, high being leaders.
Absolutely. But Ryan, see, you are only looking at the stock price of Microsoft. How about the how about the employee morale or general perception of Microsoft? Because that is where the real being side will reflect. How should we understand about that side, about companies? Should it always reflect again in the stock prices? Because it's always the doing side which reflects mostly on the stock prices. How do we evaluate this?
Well, you bring up a really great point, right? How we normally measure success of a business is by financial outcomes of some sort, right? But what the best leaders understand is there's really 2 different curves that exist in an organization. So over the course of an organization's lifespan, one of these curves is what we call the financial curve. And you know, if we just smooth it out, it looks like an inverse U, essentially. So it's going to have a growth period, it's going to kind of peak, and then it'll eventually go down. And we could look at any organization, any society, any group, and we're going to see this curve over its entire lifespan. So that's one curve that leaders focus on, is the financial curve and where they're at on that financial curve. But another curve that the best leaders focus on is the culture curve. And here's what we know about the culture curve. We know 2 things about the culture curve. One, it precedes the financial curve. So as the culture curve goes up, the financial curve will follow that same curve. The second thing that we know is the culture curve sets the ceiling for the financial curve. So the financial curve rarely exceeds the culture curve of that organization. And so coming back to Microsoft, is Satya Nadella knows this. So if we look at Glassdoor numbers, the Glassdoor numbers for Microsoft are among the highest of all organizations, and their satisfaction with Satya Nadella as a leader is one of the highest in the world. And that speaks to, one, they've completely changed the culture at Microsoft. So to give you a sense of that, during Steve Ballmer's tenure, they operated what's called a stacked rank performance management system, which means if I have a team of 10, I need to rate them from best to worst. And at the end of that evaluation period, I get rid of the bottom 1 or 2. And what that did in Microsoft is it created an environment of competition where team members were competing against each other as opposed to working together. And that was one of the first things that Satya Nadella got rid of when he took over as CEO of Microsoft, because he said, look, we've got to get rid of competition and we've got to start to foster collaboration, because that's the secret to innovation and creativity. And that's ultimately what's been the outcome, is again, he helped the culture curve go up. The financial curve is surely followed.
Absolutely. Let's come to another topic. You talk about, vertical development. And most of the time, the general perception is when you talk about vertical development, it generally means about growing on the doing side. In terms of money, in terms of promotions, in terms of better stock prices, in terms of everything else. And horizontal is much more about your internal growth. If we look at it, it's stretching yourself on towards, becoming yourself better. That shows stability, the foundation, and everything. What do you mean by vertical side? Is it the same about the general perception, or is it you are changing definitions here?
Yeah, so these terms are fairly new, vertical and horizontal development, and they were coined about 12 years ago, actually. And they were coined by a gentleman, to my knowledge. His name is Nick Petrie, and he worked for the Center of Creative Leadership. And the way he defined, there's horizontal development, which is development improving along our doing side, so gaining knowledge and skills. And that's, again, the majority of our development efforts are horizontal development. But it's vertical development, which is improving along our being side. And so what we're now starting to see is we're starting to see this wave, at least here in the United States, and hopefully we're seeing that, and I think we're seeing it globally, but we're starting to see this wave of vertical development and vertical development ideas start to permeate organizations and even cultures. I think one of the ways that we're able to see this is I've heard it called the mindfulness revolution, that we're seeing increasingly people are calling for this importance of mindfulness. And mindfulness is not a doing side characteristic, it's a being side characteristic. So as we see this revolution come forward, we're starting to see this wave that's popping up that is more focused on vertical development. And we're starting to recognize that that's as important, if not more important, than horizontal development, which has been our traditional focus.
Absolutely. So one last thing on this, and then we'll come to your book, Becoming Better, is that in the coming days, with so much of AI, and people are, being pushed out of organizations, great resignation, quiet quitting, we already talked about. Do you think organizations and leaders, this being better will be a choice or will become imperative in the coming days? As you said, the figures, they're only 8%. Does it have to become 80% plus?
Well, what we know is the quiet resignation, the resignations that are going on is a byproduct of these second level leaders. So second level leaders, they almost want to they're primarily focused on outcomes. They're there leading because they want success. And that's ultimately what leads people out of organizations, because that's not an engaging form of leadership. We really need these Satya Nadella type leaders to kind of keep our talent in our organizations. And so it is, I love how you said it. It is a business imperative to get our leaders to this third level. And I would also say it's, at the same time, it's a competitive advantage if we can do that. Because when we get leaders that are operating at this more elevated plane, it's like they are playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. And so what I'm starting to see is that more and more organizations are starting to realize that their leaders, the traditional leadership development programs, aren't cutting it. And that that in order to get the leaders to the level that they need to start focusing on something different, and that's vertical development.
Absolutely. The unfortunate part, Ryan, is that competitive advantage always gives way to competitive cost advantage. And only these business leaders only understand this cost part of it. Maybe people like you, books like yours, Becoming Better, they will help them to see things in better perspective. And that is what brings me to your book, Becoming Better. You said it's coming out in June. Who is this book for? What is it in this book? Have you given the way out how leaders can become better, or is it beyond something much more beyond that?
Yeah, that's really for anybody who wants to become better. I mean, I look back on myself 15 years ago, and I just felt like I remember being 15 years ago thinking, man, my life is good, but I want it to be better. And I didn't know how to make it better. I didn't know how to become better. And I just kind of went with what everybody else kind of did or what they said. and which was largely these horizontal development efforts. And what I found is it just didn't help me that much become the person that I really aspired to be. So this book is really for anybody who wants to become better. And the focus of the book is on introducing people to this being side. Because as I mentioned, I just have learned and that most people are not very familiar with what their being side is. They don't know how to evaluate their being side, and they don't know how to elevate along their being side. So that's the whole purpose of this book, is to help people understand they do have a being side, and I want to help them understand what exactly it is. I want to help them evaluate it, because when we can evaluate it, that helps us better understand how we can elevate along the being side. And then I give a variety of tools and resources to help people to do that being side development so that they can become their most ideal versions of themselves. Here's what I've learned. I've learned that as I have elevated in my being side, it has transformed everything. It's transformed who I am as a person, who I am as a parent, who I am as a spouse, who I am as an employee, and who I am as a leader. And I believe it can do that same thing for anybody who picks up the book. It will transform your life.
Absolutely. It will transform your life. We'll have to see, how much impact in terms of people actually get down to understanding. Some people, why I ask this is, Ryan, is some people are also afraid of reaching a higher level in terms of understanding themselves better. Sometimes they think, knowing myself better will bring all the wrong things or not so good things that I have done. It can be painful also sometimes. Should people be afraid of that anymore? Or this is a different age of transformation altogether? Being on being side is also very, very good.
Well, here's what I've learned. I've learned that any growth and development is inherently at least a little uncomfortable. And I also know that there's a lot of people their bodies are wired to avoid discomfort. And so I recognize that. And that's a big and important part about this book, is to recognize, one, in order for us to become better, we're going to have to do some things and think about things that may feel a little uncomfortable for us. But we don't want to do too much too soon. So I feel like one of the things that the book does a good job of kind of holding the reader's hand as we guide them through this vertical development journey of elevating along their being side, right? I think where people misstep is oftentimes they try to do too much at once. And when they do that, that ultimately holds them back. And so what I feel like I provide in this book is a helpful stepping stones to help people on their journey. And if we could take it just one step at a time, I think we'll find it that while I'm not going to say it's easy and I'm not going to say it's comfortable, but we're going to find that it's doable and it's life elevating. And as we do it in the right way and at the right speed, we'll just come to see that while it's not easy, the rewards of doing it far outweigh any of the costs, because we'll ultimately be a brighter light in the lives of others, in the lives of those around us. And I don't know about you, but that's what I want. I want to be a brighter light to the people around me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is much to learn from you about all these things, Ryan. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, learn more from you, about your book, Success Mindsets, Elevated Leader, and now Becoming Better, coming in June. So for all those people who would want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do so, Ryan?
Yeah, would love them to visit my website. It's ryangottfredson.com. On my website, you'll find access to any of these books. And I also have 2 free personal assessments that are designed to help people connect with and evaluate the quality of their being side. So I encourage anybody out there to take those free assessments. I'm active on all social media platforms, but most active on LinkedIn, and would love to connect with people there.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really.